Good morning everyone, let's start our lesson. Reading for writing as reciprocal reinforcement in vocabulary acquisition.
Excuse me, but what is reciprocal reinforcement? That sounds very technical.
Excellent question. It shows you are listening. Well, reciprocal reinforcement has different meanings. To the behavioral scientist it means people like people who make them feel good about themselves, but in organizational theory it means investments trigger returns and returns trigger investment.
But how does that relate to language teaching?
In second language teaching, a reciprocal reinforcement is designing lessons so that comprehensible input triggers comprehensible output. To build a deeper understanding of the targeted language structures. Perhaps this chart will help you understand. This chart shows the connections among the four communication skills and reinforcement of vocabulary acquisition. As you can see, the receptive skills such as listening and reading help students develop initial levels of processing new vocabulary. These are phonemic processing and structural processing. However, if a language learner is going to retain the ability to use new vocabulary, much deeper processing is needed. That's the role of output. And, preferably, comprehensible output. Deep processing of language is needed for new vocabulary to be stored in a learner's long-term memory. That requires a learner to associate words with images. Images help a language learner make associations that trigger meaningful analysis of new vocabulary. It is through analysis that a learner understands collocations and grammar. Output in the form of speaking or writing are ways that a language learner can test their individual hypotheses of how new vocabulary and idioms are used in the target language. That is how reciprocal reinforcement of vocabulary acquisition from reading to writing leads to deep semantic processing.
Say, Professor, what's like the difference between, comprehensible input and, comprehensible output? I'm just saying, yes see?
Good question, but perhaps you were absent, or sleeping last class. I will explain it again for your benefit.
Gee, thanks, Professor.
When a language learner is able to understand a message based on past knowledge combined with auditory and visual clues, the message is comprehensible, thus comprehensible input. Swain's output hypothesis states that learning takes place when learners encounter gaps in linguistic knowledge of L2. By noticing gaps, learners become aware of them and may be able to modify output with a heightened awareness.
Got it, Professor. I'll be sure to study that this time.
Allow me to use a metaphor to explain more. My grandfather was a carpenter. He once told me that even if you can read a blueprint, you cannot fully understand how to build a house. Similarly, a language learner needs to continually test hypotheses about how language works to achieve heightened levels of comprehensible output, learning by doing, right. Now, vocabulary acquisition is not a one-shot process, but rather, vocabulary acquisition is an incremental process that involves moving from maintenance rehearsal to richer levels of encoding with elaborate rehearsal. Writing is a form of elaborate rehearsal. Thus, reciprocal reinforcement. Writing, as a form of elaborate rehearsal, allows a language learner to test hypotheses about how specific vocabulary are used. Appropriate feedback allows retesting hypotheses. Writing assignments based on class readings are a form of pushed output. Being pushed in output is a concept parallel to that of the I+1 of comprehensible input. Indeed, one might call this the comprehensible output hypothesis. Now, can anyone tell me the three functions of output?
Yes, Professor, I can. The three functions of output are the noticing function,
the hypotheses testing function and the metalinguistic function. First, learners notice what they do not know or only know partially in the target language. Next, the learner tests a tacit hypothesis and receives feedback from an interlocutor. Finally, learners reflect on the language they learn, and thereby the output enables them to control and internalize linguistic knowledge. This is deep processing.
Excellent, Amy. You get an A for the day. So, to sum up, reciprocal reinforcement in the form of guided output can lead to deep processing of new vocabulary. Now, for you teachers, here are some reciprocal reinforcement teaching strategies for vocabulary acquisition that you can use in reading for writing classes.